Man, I'm really loving the pace of Amphibia lately. I've always liked Amphibia's basic message show episodic episodes, but they've found a really good balance between those, the standard Amphibia episode, and these bigger lore-related episodes. Like, my first instinct here is to say that just when it feels like we need another lore episode to keep us invested, they give us one, but that's not even true. I could have gone another week or two without one and been perfectly happy, and yet here is another big lore episode, right here, already. And yet, one of the most remarkable things about this show is just how natural everything feels. These big lore pit stop episodes feel perfectly in line with everything else that we see in this show. The dynamics are still consistent. The messages are still consistent. The tone is still somehow consistent. Like, it's so weird seeing episodes like these two episodes, The Second Temple and... what was the name of the second one? Barrel's Warhammer? That doesn't sound right, but that's what the wiki says, so... Barrel's Warhammer. It is remarkable that episodes like The Second Temple and Barrel's Warhammer can still feel tonally in line with the rest of this show. And yes, you did hear me right. The first of these two episodes is The Second Temple already, which is also nuts. I expected to wait a lot longer to get to The Second Temple. Like, I still expect we'll have to wait quite a while longer to get to the third one, just because of Sasha's situation right now. But man, I expected them to space these out more, and the fact that they didn't really helps support the idea that these temples are just a means to an end. That the girls have had to give up their power back to the stones, specifically so that they can make the choice later to reclaim them when stuff really starts to happen. The temples themselves are not actually the end game like they could have been. Getting into the first of these two episodes, The Second Temple, though, man, this one was so freaking good. Both of these were really good, but this one was so freaking good. For one important reason that I'll get to in a minute. In this episode, of course, they go for the Second Temple. Marcy has, in the meantime, researched the Second Temple and learned everything that there is to know about it from literature. And as she puts it, there's not a lot to learn about this one, just a lot of mentions of heart, tying back into the three traits of the three girls, Anne's, of course, being heart. And when they show up, there's an archway, which signifies that they've reached the temple, that glows blue, the same color as Anne's power. Like, at this point, we don't need any more confirmation that each of the girls has a different power, represented by a different colored glow, and that the traits associated with those powers are strength, heart, and intelligence. But man, it feels so rewarding to theorize about a show. And for so long, to theorize about what the plot of the show is going to be, and have those theories proven right and reinforced without any secret, sneaky twists coming in to switch stuff up at the last second, just for the sake of being twisty. Like, a lot of the stuff in this show, I think I've said this before, I don't remember if I said this before or not, a lot of the stuff in this show, though, goes about exactly how I expect it to. But, like, in a way that's not boring. It's satisfying. And it's really cool. But they show up, and there's no temple there. Instead, there's just... I cannot remember her name for the life of me. The crazy newt from the Bizarre Bazaar way back in Season 1, who I had almost completely forgot existed. I still really need to go back and rewatch Season 1. Like, really bad. And it's immediately clear what's happening here. That there's no traditional temple. Instead, Anne is going to be tested by this other person. Someone who she can interact with, who can antagonize her, who can pass judgment on her. Because of course she's going to. Her trait is heart. And the way that manifests is how she interacts with other people. We saw that all the way back when they were still in Newtopia, and she was able to make fast allies of people around the city. So as things continue to go wrong for our characters, and Anne has to continue to make choices for the group, making selfless choices as she goes, it's clear that that's what the test is. That creepy newt lady, really do wish I could remember her name, it's bumming me out, is specifically trying Anne to make sure she's worthy of something. And somehow she was able to plan for this trial before Anne and her party even arrived. Because the first of the tasks that Anne must face is Newt Lady gives them caterpillar fur coats to replace their cold gear, because they're in the Arctic region of Amphibia for this one, which was nice. We got to see more of Amphibia's climates. It was really cool. But as they're heading up the mountain towards where she claims the temple is, because she's motivating them by telling them she can take them to the actual temple, she summons a bird who thinks that they're caterpillars because they're coats, putting them at risk, forcing Anne to lure it away with her own coat, but surrendering the coat in the process. So not only did she know that Anne was going to come with other people, and making this trial dependent on there being other people present with the person being tested, just like the first one, which is interesting. But she knew how many people were coming, what size coats they wore, and specifically exactly how to motivate Anne to protect them. And that's not the only test. There are other tests as well, and even some interactions that I think were tests, but I'll get into that in a second, but it's unclear whether or not they were. But they're consistently like this. There are things where she would have had to plan ahead, specifically for Anne arriving here today with the people she was with, in order for them to work. And it's also implied through her dialogue that she has some ability of foresight. And then at the end, after Anne passes and proves herself, she declares Anne worthy, even going so far as to say that she's been waiting a long time, that her and her order, the people who research and protect these temples, have been waiting a long time for someone like Anne. And she asks what it is that Anne wants, as if there is something else that she could have earned via this process, aside from just recharging the gem. She also says at one point that she's the last of her order, and I don't believe that for a second, specifically because, if I'm recalling correctly, I could double check the dialogue, but I'm pretty sure I heard her right. She says, "We've been waiting for someone like you for a long time."
We have been waiting for someone like you for such a long time.
Which implies that there are others out there still, right? And in the end, as the gem is charging, it charges way more slowly than the last one did, and she blames it on her staff, the thing that is specifically charging the gem, being old. But, I mean, there's a difference in the show between, like, obvious magic-powered tech and just magic, and her staff didn't seem to be the former, it seemed to be the latter. Which makes it interesting that its age matters in this situation. I don't know, I might be reading too much into this, but I think this was a test as well, because the whole final interaction between them takes place on the top of a tower that is so high that it sits above the clouds. But even from all the way up there, Anne is able to hear what she thinks is her friends screaming in terror. And so she grabs the gem early and leaves, before the gem has fully drained all of the power out of her, to go and save them. And I think that was a test too, because, I mean, yeah, it was a misunderstanding. They were just screaming in excitement about, like, internet videos or something, I don't remember. Doesn't matter. And if this was a test, then what's-her-name would have needed to know ahead of time that was going to happen. But first of all, they were so high up, and yet she was still able to hear them. And also it's implied that what's-her-name, I really should look it up at this point, seriously. I didn't think I was going to have to, like, reference her by name this many times in the review. Whatever, I'm moving on. Just don't worry about it. It is implied that she has some ability of foresight, so she could have predicted that and worked it into her trial. And I think what she's doing here is she is trying to, in some roundabout way, show Anne, and by extension the other girls, without actually showing them, that they have this power and that they can choose how to use it. Like, again, I could totally be reading too much into this, but it definitely felt like that's what was happening. Because the whole situation with the gem charging so slowly just felt off. It felt deliberate, if that makes sense. And I still think there's more to this. Between the fact that Anne apparently could have achieved other things aside from just charging the gem, and the fact that, like, the various glowiness, the various glowinesses, regardless of whether they're specifically colored to associate with each of the girls' colors or not, they still have to come from somewhere. And, like, there are glowinesses in certain areas throughout this episode that occur before the power is drained back out of Anne in any capacity. So there has to be another source of each of these magics aside from just the gems, which means there has to be more of this magic than just what ended up inside the girls. This is supported by the fact that the green gem is able to shine that light leading to the second temple without risking its charge running out. This power is not so limited as we've been led to believe it is. And so I still believe it's entirely possible that these trials, these temple trials, are leading to the girls realizing their specific traits, strength, mind, and heart, on an entirely different level, so that they can draw upon that power without specifically having to have drained it from the gems first. Like I said, back in the first temple, though, that could just be wishful thinking, but it's definitely a direction I might take this story if I was writing it. I also absolutely loved the final interaction between Anne and What's-Her-Face, where Anne fesses up to the fact that she makes mistakes, but acknowledges that making those mistakes has made her a better person, confirming that what these temples are here to test is not that the girls have intelligence and have heart and eventually have strength, but that they have grown as people via their adventures here and grown those traits as well, evolved those traits into something more selfless, which is going to be super difficult for Sasha, but we'll talk about that in just a second. I did mention, though, that I love this one a lot for one specific reason, and I have somehow managed to restrain myself from mentioning it up to this point. Anne and Marcy share a coat. Be still my shipper heart. No, I'm joking. Just a tad. I'm joking, just a tad. It was a very cute scene, though. I adore the dynamic between these two a lot. I also really adored Hot Pop's little pocket in Marcy's bird mounts jacket. It was a hop pocket. This show's adorable, man. I don't know what else to say about this one. I could have made this one into its own separate review. The only reason I didn't is because I don't feel like I have enough to make the second half of this one into its own review as well. But I definitely could have made this episode into its own review. It was very, very good, and managed to pack almost as much content into half an episode as the first temple packed into a single one, just by avoiding the fact that they didn't have to show off the details of a temple's architecture this time and also explain what was going on again, because we had already seen the first temple. It was very cool. It was a very cool, efficient use of time. In fact, efficient is probably a really good way of describing this show. This show, it sounds dry to say it, but this show is very efficient. It's very efficient with delivering to us exactly the best version of this story. It is definitely noteworthy, though, that both of these temples were only functional as tests for their individual girls because they had other people with them, and specifically because they had to think of other people. That has come up twice now in 2 of these 3 trials. It is definitely a running theme and something that we are supposed to keep in mind as we move forward, especially considering what happens in the next episode. I do not remember the title of it again. Beryl's Warhammer. It's called Beryl's Warhammer. This is another Sasha episode, and the plot is exceedingly simple. I'm going to blast right through it. Grime and Sasha and their 2 little cohorts have called a meeting of the other tower captains, all of whom are toads and have their own toad battalions behind them, and not counting the guys who were literally just appointed to the final tower last week, but everybody else. They called a meeting of everybody else to try to rally them to Grime's cause, which right now is still nothing noble. He just wants to overthrow the king because the king keeps toads down just like he keeps frogs down. Though I still feel like it's a cause that could evolve into something noble over time, because Andreas is definitely, if not the biggest bad of the show, then one of the show's big bads. And the other toads like the idea of this. They want to overthrow the crown. Their main issue is that they can't agree on who should be the leader. They don't want it to be Grime because he's a fugitive, so they issue him a task. a trial, in fact. He is to go try to find and return with the aforementioned titular Warhammer. Something which he doesn't entirely find possible, but Sasha, being Sasha, agrees to bring it back before sunrise, putting herself on the spot and giving her something to prove. The Warhammer is embedded in the ground. It kind of resembles Thor's hammer from the Thor movie, or something like the Sword in the Stone. It's that kind of imagery. It's implied that only someone worthy can pull this hammer from where it lays. And in keeping with the Thor's hammer imagery, the beast is a large serpentine creature, like something you might see in Norse mythology. And even though she promised that she wouldn't take things too far, to the other two whose names I do not remember, the ones that aren't her or Grime, she does take things too far, ignoring their pleas once they reach their limit and don't feel like they can press on in this specific situation. She continues to press on, putting them at risk in order to get the Warhammer. She does succeed in getting it, finally summoning her glowing eyes, giving her the strength to rip it from where it sits in the worm's head. At which point it's revealed that the Warhammer is actually ancient tech, which draws upon her magic to activate, confirming that the technology in this show is powered by magic. But there's absolutely no indication that, like, her magic was what made her worthy of drawing it, or even that she needed to be worthy to draw it, because the lore behind the hammer is that it was used to protect a village in danger. And yet Sasha, her desire for the hammer was entirely selfish. It boiled down to, she has learned that Marcy and Anne are getting by fine without her. She feels salty about it, wants to show them up by winning, knowing that they're on the other side. And so she muscles her way into claiming the hammer. It goes to Grime at the end. He's the one wielding it, but she's the one who claims it for entirely selfish reasons. So if this was some kind of prove your worthiness kind of situation, considering the story behind the hammer, I can't imagine that she would be worthy, even if it is somehow specifically powered by her specific magic. Though the fact that it might be does imply that the old theory that there's one kind of magic for each of the three main races, frog, newt, and toad, it does support that. Because the previous wielder of the hammer, I guess his name was Beryl, I don't remember, was specifically a toad. And in the end, because she behaved selfishly and she pushed and took things too far when she really didn't have to, the time limit placed on her was arbitrary. She placed it on herself. She could have waited until they were in a better situation, but because she didn't, because she pressed ahead when the other two, again, I do not remember their names. Tell me what their names were, please, in the comments. I'd really appreciate it. Because she put them in danger, they leave. But Grime reassures her that sometimes that's just what happens when you're trying to change the world. He isn't quite as efficient with his words, but that's basically the gist of what he says. But you can tell Sasha feels bad about driving them away, which definitely means that she does, underneath all of her Sasha-ness, have a good heart. She does care about other people. Like, it's hard to see, because when she's disagreeable, she's really disagreeable. But I still definitely feel like she's heading towards a redemption. The implications of this second episode, though, are definitely the most interesting part about it, I think. Just because we don't get a ton of it, but we get this extra Toad-specific lore. And we don't get a lot of that. We get a lot of frog lore, and we've gotten a decent amount of newt lore. We don't get a ton of Toad lore. And I'm really looking forward to sitting on it a little bit and thinking about it, and thinking about what it might mean for the show going forward. There might not be anything, but who frickin' knows in a show like this, right? It's really exciting. And even if it isn't anything, even if there's nothing more to it, this was still a really good episode. Sasha is faced with her own trial. It's not a temple trial, obviously, but she's faced with her own trial, and she fails. Like, she gets the thing she was trying to get, and I definitely feel that this hammer is going to come into play later, but whereas the other girls each made sacrifices for the people with them, Sasha wasn't able to do that. She failed. And the parallel there is just super interesting to me. It's also interesting, this is harkening back to the Second Temple a little bit, but I think it's basically confirmed at this point too, that aside from each of the girls having different power, their individual traits are also supposed to balance each other out and complement each other. Because we see in the Second Temple when the bird is attacking, and Anne has to make the choice to give up one of the coats, and she makes the choice to give up her own. The rest of the group turns to Marcy first, because she knows about this particular species of bird, and should therefore know what to do, but she wasn't able to intuit the fact that this bird might come after them, even though they're not its typical diet, just because of what they're wearing. Her knowledge failed her in that moment, and she froze, and it was up to Anne to make a split decision to act. Just like it was up to Anne back in the first temple to get through to Marcy when Marcy was letting her intellectualism get the best of her and distract her from what was really important. And meanwhile, in Sasha's story here, we see her going for the goal of the Warhammer rather than listening to the concerns of her friends, because there was no one like Anne there to pull her back from that precipice. These are completely separate stories, set in completely different parts of this world, and yet they still tie together so intricately. It's really masterful. This show is a masterpiece. In fact, it's hard to decide which of these two episodes is better overall, and one of them is a tempo episode. How great is that? These are both amazing episodes. This show just keeps getting better. I keep expecting it to plateau, and it isn't. It's not plateauing. I'm freaking out a little bit. How good can this show get? We're going to find out eventually. I'm so excited, guys. It's so good. As per usual, though, I'd like to know, what do you think of the Second Temple, or whatever the heck the second of these episodes was called? I forgot again. Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video and share it with anyone else you think might enjoy my content. Subscribe if you haven't. I'm trying to get myself out there, and I really mean this. I'd really appreciate it if you guys could help. You can also check out my social medias. Links to those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.